So I'm here with Andy, the owner of Tanglefoot Brewing, located in Temple, Texas. We're going to be chatting about opening and operating a small brewery. Most of the topics came from me, but also my YouTube community also submitted questions, so I included those as well. We're going to first talk about more general questions and learn more about you. And then we're going to take a more focused approach and ask some questions about financing, red tape, equipment, and location considerations. First, I want to ask, what are you drinking?
I am drinking the 12-degree pale lager from none other than Tanglefoot Brewing.
Love it. Okay, so why don't you go ahead and just give us an overview of your brewery? So, like, how long, like, when did you open? Why did you choose Temple, Texas, and what kind of beers do you serve?
Yes. So my name is Andy Martinek. I am, the owner operator of Tanglefoot Brewing in Temple, Texas. I got into the beer industry about 10 years ago. I ran a brewery in Austin for, I worked there for about 9.5 years, and I took over the brewery in 2015. So I learned on the job there as far as commercial brewing experience. And then I started Tanglefoot as a side project. So I wanted to start a lager-focused brewery side project. And the number one goal to opening this project was to do it as low barrier to entry as possible. I wanted to cash flow it, and I wanted it to be, because breweries are very finicky businesses, they're very capital intensive, and I wanted to test an idea first, basically. So my family owns a barbecue restaurant in Temple, Texas. I'm from Temple. It's in like smack dab in the center. They call it the heart of Texas, in the middle of the state. It's about an hour north of Austin. They've been there 53 years. The barbecue restaurant's been open. So talked to my dad. They had a license to sell beer and wine. And so I was like, hey, why don't we just tag on to that license? And we'll open a little brew pub as a subordinate license.
Sure.
And then I started, once we kind of decided to do that, I started concepting the idea and picked, I mentioned I wanted to focus on lagers, and then picked Czech lagers because I'm Czech. I have Czech heritage. And then Bell County, the county that Temple's in, is a huge Czech population. So it kind of all snowballed together. Tanglefoot is a nickname for Temple. So it's like, it's got local history as well as like Czech heritage, as well as like Texas history. So it's, I always like to say that it's a Czech lager focused brewery, but the brand was developed with like Czech beer culture meets like Texas beer culture meets like old Western saloon type of culture. So yeah, it's a
very cool. Well, that was actually going to be my next question. Why did you choose lagers? So thanks for clearing that up.
Yeah. So the deeper answer to that is, I've been brewing craft beer for the last 10 years professionally. And as every seasoned craft beer drinker probably knows, there's a kind of like this journey that our palates go through where we get into craft beer with a pale ale or, Boston lager. We immediately jump up to triples and Belgians and barrel aged stuff. And then our palate gets fatigued. And so now as a professional brewer, all I want to drink is lagers, primarily 5% and below.
That's what I'm drinking now. Yeah. So you also have a YouTube channel. So why don't you go kind of overview what you upload on the channel?
Yeah. So I started the YouTube channel specifically, I'm a solopreneur. This is 100% everything that happens in the business is me. And so I really wanted to document the process of like, kind of what this interview is about. Like, how do you start a brewery? How do things work in a small brewery? And specifically want to get into kind of like deep diving into, very nuanced aspects of the business, including the financials, the hardships, like, sometimes you have, specific to Tanglefoot, I had a $15 sales day once, you know what I mean? So like documenting things like that nobody talks about. Mm-hmm. And then also having that kind of like video catalog to look back in 10 years and be like, holy shit, this is crazy journey.
That's cool. I love it. Yeah. And were you homebrewing before this, your craft beer journey?
So I got into homebrew. So my longer career story is I immediately out of high school, I went to culinary school to be a pastry chef, did that, moved across the country a couple of times, ended up in Phoenix, Arizona, fell in love with craft beer when I was like 20, turned 21 in Arizona, and then was off to the races every single day, would go into the beer store and buy in 2 or 3 bombers.
Sweet.
And this was in like, 2011, right when craft beer was starting to take off, and I just really fell in love with it there, and so got into home brewing. But my homebrew experience, I feel like, is much different than most other professional brewers. in that I probably brewed a total of like 10 batches of homebrew in my life.
Wow.
So I homebrewed several times, but like the first batch was an extract brew, and
Mhm.
immediately was like, I understand this and I want more. And so then I moved to an all grain brew, and I was like, I know this. I want to now. I need a keggle. And so
Yeah.
at each step, I was like, I know that I like this in a capacity that I want to, for lack of a better term, increase my capacity. And then ultimately ended up getting a job at the brewery that I ran in Austin. It's called Black Star Co-op. Shout out to them. That was like my favorite bar in town. And so I got a job front of house and then slowly transitioned into the brewery. And then a lot of things fell into place, a lot of luck, obviously, but kind of, took the leap into professional brewing and loved it.
Very nice.
Yeah.
And you kind of touched on this slightly in initially, but when did you start thinking about opening up a brewery, and like what planted the idea? Was it just home brewing, and you just know you liked it and you were moving quick and you just thought that you wanted to try professional work?
When I really got it into my mind that I wanted to pursue this, it was after going years of me thinking to myself, the world doesn't need another brewery. Like,
Mhm.
we don't need more
No.
like Simcoe Pale Ales. Not to, I hope you don't have a Simcoe Pale Ale
No.
on right
No.
now. But the point being that like there's plenty of great beer out there, and the world doesn't need more. But I felt like I needed to feel that I was ready to add something special to the market. I didn't want to just open the kind of like standard turnkey, you got your 5 core beers on and
Mhm.
people come there because you're a brewery. Like
Yeah.
that, in my opinion, that part of the industry is kind of gone. Um, and so I really wanted to be like, I need to add something special. So in about 2019, I had been running the brewery in Austin for about 4 years. And then the opportunity kind of came up at the barbecue restaurant where it was now legal to do this. And I was like, this would be the simplest, easiest way to trial my concept. And so that's where it kind of started.
Great. And this will be an easy one. Do you work full time at the brewery, or do you have a second job?
I do work full time at the brewery.
Okay. Do you think it's possible to run and operate a brewery if you had a second job? Like, do you think there's enough time in the day to get what you need done to operate that brewery and also hold a second job?
Well, the short answer is yes. I did it for a year at
Oh,
Black Star.
wow.
So I
Okay.
was running, yeah. So I was running the brewery at Black Star, and this was during COVID, where
Hmm.
I was the only employee in the brewery at Black Star. And then I eventually hired somebody to kind of take over some canning responsibilities, but I was
Yeah.
the only employee at Black Star, and I was building out a brand, physically building the bar, painting, cleaning, physically brewing the beer. And I was open initially 1 day a week, but then 2 days a week. So I would work Monday through Friday in Austin, get off work at about 1 p.m. on Friday, drive up to Temple an hour north, open at 4 p.m., 4 to 8 p.m., and then Friday and Saturday service, and then come back and do it all again. And then Sundays when I would do production. So yes,
Jeez.
it's possible, but with certain limitations, right?
Yeah.
I couldn't have been open every day of the week.
And you mentioned you worked at a brewery before, you're in leadership. But how important do you think it is to work in a brewery before deciding to open one yourself? I imagine it's probably pretty important, right?
100%. Yeah. I just don't think, not even for like, I mean, I could stand on the soapbox, but I'll try to give you a concise answer. I think that it's more important to go into opening a brewery if that's what I'm guessing that's what your audience is interested in.
Hmm.
And I would say it's much more important going into it with a fundamental knowledge of business rather than an education in homebrewing or even a formal beer education, because it's
Sure.
irrelevant that you can make a good beer. I mean, at the end of the day, I like to sum it up and say it's not enough. It's not enough to have good and or great beer,
Hmm.
but you have to have great beer. So like,
Yeah.
it's not enough to have a great product, but you
Hmm.
also in this climate have to have a great product. So it's kind of both and. But I think having a good solid business foundation is good. And
Hmm.
then expectations. I mean, setting expectations of it's not just brewing the double IPA with your friends on the
Yep.
weekends, getting drunk. Like
Hmm.
that's 1% of the job.
Great. Well, that's perfect. Thank you for the detailed answer there.
Yeah.
And the viewers want to know, what is a typical day like for someone who owns and operates a brewery? from like morning to night? Like what's a normal day?
Yeah, so I'll give you kind of like a production example, and then I'll give you an example of something else. But the production example, or just like work example for me, is I open on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, 1 to 8. So I will drive to Temple. I still live in Austin, an hour away. I
Okay.
will drive to Temple around 8 o'clock in the morning, get there at 9 a.m., and then I will get prepped for service. And in my case, I do cans. So I'm in a tiny brewery, and I have a video on my YouTube channel about how I can. It's very, very rudimentary, one can at a time with a
I love
percent.
it. I
Yeah,
think that's super
yeah.
cool.
But I get in and I stock can inventory. I'll clean glassware and get everything ready for service. Get the pub set up, and then service will start at 1 p.m. I'll run service. It could be super slow and I'm just standing there all day by myself, twiddling my thumbs, or it could be busy and I have people in there all day. 8 o'clock, I close, and then I clean up a little bit. I wash my glasses by hand. And so I wash the glasses usually the next day instead of staying up there for another 45 minutes washing glasses. So
Mhm.
if I don't keep up with all the glassware during service, and I'll that's one of the tasks that I do before I open the next day.
Sure.
So that's like a typical day. So that is like a 12 hours of work, depending on how you slice it. But there's a lot of passive downtime in there too.
Sure. Okay. Great.
Yeah.
Next, we could jump into financing, taxes, red tape. And this has got to be the area where most people had the most questions on, because this is kind of elusive. It seems like whenever you're doing research, it's hard to get, actual answers on a lot of this stuff. And I know it's different for everyone, but
Yep.
it's just
And on
another
that
day.
note, we'll crack another beer.
Love it. Love it.
Yeah.
So I guess the biggest question, right, is how much did it cost for you to start your brewery?
So let me preface these answers with I am, up until like literally today, I was telling you before we started recording that I am going through the process of putting the business in my name. So the way that this business was structured, and I think I already mentioned, I wanted to have the lowest barrier to entry to trial this concept, and I wanted to cash flow it. So I have zero debt on this at all, and just
Awesome.
doing it as simple as possible. So my family's barbecue restaurant in Temple, Texas. They had a license to sell beer and wine. So I tagged on to that license, or my dad owns that business called Al's Barbecue Barn. So they had a license to sell beer, tag on, basically check a box and pay a fee in the eyes of the Texas Alcoholic Beverage Commission to become a brew pub. And then once that licensing and the TTB, the governmental licensing, went through, basically we were a brewery. So it was literally the simplest way to open a brewery.
Yeah.
And I can dive into that more if you're interested. So with all that being said, the business is not opened in a traditional manner. So all of my numbers are way, 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 way deflated. So it took me, the first system that I bought was a kind of a pretty janky homebrew system. And all in, I think I probably spent less than $3,000 on all the equipment. So I was brewing on a 15 barrel, basically a half barrel system, and I was double mashing into a 55 or 50 gallon spike brew kettle.
Okay.
And so I would brew that, and then I would knock out into a 1 barrel Spiegel plastic fermentation vessel into an upright chest freezer, and I had 2 of those. And so that was my entire equipment. And I had a chest freezer that was the cold liquor tank for obviously for knocking out. So my process, or my equipment, was very, very simple, but I have a very strong fundamental brewing knowledge. So I was making great beer with that equipment. So that cost was very low. And then building out the bar was about probably like, I would say all in all $10,000 to like, I built a bar, we did electrical, I got some other various equipment here and there, painting and all that stuff. So the initial startup for that stuff, and then licensing on top of that. So, and TABC, which is the Texas Alcoholic Beverage Commission, for every 2 years. It used to be like $2,000 for every 2 years. Now it's $3,000 basically. And so various fees here and there. So probably like less than 15 grand for opening the way that I did. Yeah. And then shortly after that, or not shortly, but earlier this year, I bought a newer upgraded system from another brewery in Texas. And that system itself was 20 grand. And there have been other like renewing license and things like that kind kind of go in there. So I would say like a quick and easy answer would be like 30 grand for what I did there.
That's wild.
Yeah.
That's really wild. Because I was going to ask, do you think it's possible to open up a brewery of your size for less than $100,000?
Anything's possible, man. This is America.
So it sounds like it is. It sounds like it's very possible.
It is, but it's all of these answers come with caveats, right? Like, do you want to open a tiny brewery where you're sharing space in your family's old barbecue restaurant? Then yeah, you can do it.
Right.
Are you going to have a brand new location that's built from the ground up, perfect brewing condition and equipment in downtown Houston? No, you can't do that.
Yeah.
So it's all about what your goal is. And my goal specifically was to open a brewery concept, and that was it.
Yeah, I think you did it. I'm impressed, dude. I really am with it because it's always something. I'm a big DIY guy, and I always try to do things that the lowest cost of entry possible. So that's definitely interesting to me that you could open a brewery like that and
you learn a lot.
Pay too much. Right. So I know you said you cash flowed the business. But I do have a question from the viewers about how you would recommend someone secure financing to open up a brewery. So ideally you'd have cash, right? But in a lot of cases, you just don't have the cash to start a brewery. So have you looked into like SBAs or look at family and friends or credit cards, or did you look at any other avenues just in case your costs went higher than what you had in the bank?
So currently, no is the answer. But I mean, I've looked into these things, but I've like prior to opening this, I was pretty stable financially. Like as far as like I didn't have any debt whatsoever. I had saved up a good chunk of change or a decent amount of money to be able to start this project, all in anticipation of starting this project. And so I have a very fiscally conservative approach to this. However, now I'm getting to the point, which is I'm in the same boat as your viewers, where it's like, now in order to scale, in order to do anything else with this property, it's not producing it. It's not like a profitable business in the sense that it's producing enough money to cash flow growth. So I will have to pursue those things. And my nature of being like real DIY, like you were mentioning, I don't want to bring on any investors. I really don't want like family or friends involved. I'm very, very independent, and mostly because like I don't, like, yes, I want to build something that's 100% my control, but I also don't want anybody else putting money into this because it's not a sure bet. Like there's not a guarantee that this is going to be successful. I think it is, but I don't want to put that risk on anybody else.
And there's obviously a lot of things, you need to worry about when starting a business. Like you might, there's like legal requirements, there might be architectural requirements, accounting requirements. Did you outsource these things, or are you outsourcing those types of things? Like, did you get a lawyer when you started your business, or did you do all of this by yourself?
I did it all by myself, but again, because it was so simple, now that I'm going through the process of like actually making this my own business, I'm pursuing, looking into those things, like obviously getting some legal counsel as far as structuring the business goes and things like that. But from pursuing, to answer your audience's question about like pursuing financing in order to open a brewery, it's really difficult to give an answer that isn't don't do it because I don't know what anybody's skill set is. I don't know if you're like super like this is 100% what you want to do with your life. If owning a small business is something you've done before, so you have maybe some previous insight into how much work it takes. But for the average like home brewer that's like, I brew good beer, I want to open a brewery, I think the consensus is always like, do what you love as your hobby. And if you want to turn that into a professional thing, then like seek out professional advice, which I guess is kind of what this is about, or go work somewhere and see how the ins and outs of the business work. Before you dive into, like you said, I don't think if you were to open a brewery from scratch, you could realistically do it under $500,000 and for what most people want to do. Like they want like a 10-barrel system, and they want a nice tap room, and they want a location that's nice, and it's hard stuff.
Right. And you do not have a business partner, correct?
Well, okay. I mean, I don't have a business partner, no.
Okay. How valuable do you think a business partner would be? Because I know a lot of people, when they start a brewery, they usually have two guys going in with it to share the financial part of it and also to share the responsibility part. So maybe one guy runs production side, one guy runs the business side. How important do you think it is for owning and operating a brewery to have a partner?
I don't think it's important. I think it's another lever that you can use if somebody has skill set that you don't have and they're
Mhm.
willing to go into business with you. Then I think that's amazing. I personally have never felt attracted to that.
Mhm.
I just am. To quote Dave Ramsey, for any of your listeners that listen to Dave Ramsey,
I do.
the only ship that doesn't sail is a partnership.
Mhm.
But it's I've heard of more horror stories than like, oh my gosh, this was the best thing to ever happen. And that's not saying that it is or isn't a good thing to do. It's just from my experience, I've only heard like if this business is going to go down in flames, do you want this person to go down in flames with you? Is that like, do you want that relationship to end, or do
Right.
you think that you can weather that? So yeah, I think that that's an important aspect of it. But if somebody if somebody has money and you don't have access to money, then that makes sense to have a partnership, as long
Sure.
as you understand who has creative control and who's overseeing what aspects of the business.
Right. Okay, great. A viewer wanted to know what inspections did you have to get done for either local or federal requirements? I didn't know if you needed to get any inspections or not.
So again, unique to my situation. Usually, when you're opening a brewery, you'll have to go through a kind of like an endless checklist of uh, permitting and inspections for a new build, specifically for like building, construction stuff like that, making sure that your electrical passes city code, your gas is passes city code, that the fire marshal comes out and inspects you. I was tagging on to an already operating business that had been there 53 years, and so none of that aspect of like a build out was required, but still had to go through permitting from TTB, which is the federal authority that regulates firearms, alcohol, and tobacco, and then TABC, which is the local state authority, plus the county and the city each have their own like little licensing and stuff like that.
That's good to know. I know you said you're on a one barrel system, right?
No, well, now I'm on a three and a half barrel system.
Oh, 3.5 barrels. Okay. Okay. So I think I think that's a good starting point for, at least when I was looking into it, most people recommended like 3 to 6 barrels when you're starting out for like a smaller brewery. And I guess a question about margins when you're brewing at that scale, because obviously you make more money per glass the larger scale you can go. But if you're limited to like 3.5 barrels on your typical beer, like what does a typical glass cost you to make?
It depends on the pour.
Right, right. But like in general, like a lager, you said which should be a relatively cheap pour, I would imagine. But
Yeah, I'd say like 30 cents for the beer itself, just the cogs, which is the cost of goods of the materials it takes to make that. That's
mm,
not including labor, electrical, rent, any of that other stuff, just the pure like cost of goods.
mm,
Um, and so yeah, so obviously there's great margin. Like I always shot for a 90 to 95%
wow.
margin on over the counter by the pint.
Yes.
So I would price accordingly for that at Black Star, and same thing at Tanglefoot. But the another metric that I have for beer, like it used to be like I always wanted to shoot to hit over $1,000 per barrel in revenue for on-site draft sales.
Okay.
Now I'd like to see it more like $1,200, specifically because beer prices go up over time.
Mm,
My pours are only about 13 ounces, so it kind of works out to be a little bit higher.
okay.
But as far as the capacity aspect of it earlier that you were alluding to, my capacity, and for those that don't know, capacity is the size of the equipment. So, i.e., your brew house is kind of irrelevant if you can basically just brew in like 3 times a day. But the size of your fermentation space multiplied by the number of times you can turn those tanks in a given year. And so my beers take 2 months to make. So an IPA takes about 2 weeks. So my capacity is about 1/4 of what the capacity would be with a 3 barrel system if you were just cranking out hazy
Sure.
IPA.
Sure.
So that's another kind of like, you know, cost associated that is just time.
Right.
So it makes it a little more tricky on how much beer I can brew. But yeah, for on-site sales, I like to shoot for at least a 90% margin on a pint that I would
Okay.
sell. And then
That's
there's different margin metrics for each, like 6 packs or kegs of beer.
yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. And I imagine cans are a lot less than 90%.
Oh
right?
yeah. Cans are kind of like the cans are what every brewer wants. Like every single person that owns or that home brews or wants to own a brewery, like the first thing they think of is like my can on the shelf. And
Yeah,
but it's the lowest margin item that you make because
sure.
packaging is so expensive.
Yeah,
And then the price points that generally you sell them at are make it a
a
pretty low
lot.
margin
Yeah, a
sale.
lot less. Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, it'd be hard to sell a $30 six pack, right?
Yeah.
Okay, a tax question for you from a viewer. Are you taxed at the volume sold or the volume produced?
Um, sort of. Well, produced is the short answer, but the way that it's calculated is you make wort. So on the hot side, you make wort, you move that wort into a fermentation vessel, and that wort turns into beer after it's fermented.
Mhm.
Once you move that beer into a what's called a tax determination vessel, basically anything past that point that would
Wow.
be considered finished beer.
Yep.
So you put it into a bright tank, or you put it into kegs, or you put it into well, primarily those cans would come after one of those steps, but once you move it into those tax determination vessels, you are recording the volume that you transferred, and that is your that is you hold that number, right? So that's your inventory, and
Mhm.
then that inventory plus all inventories throughout any given time period, let's say a month, less whatever you sold. So
Mhm.
if you produced a
Okay.
thousand or 100 barrels of beer or 100 gallons, whatever the unit is, and you sold um, you started with 100, you produced 100, and then you sold 50.
Yeah.
So that's 200 beers were produced and you
Yep.
sold 50, so you're left with 150 gallons of beer.
Right.
You're only taxed on that 50, at
Ah,
least at the state level.
okay.
On Yeah, so on the I guess it's the same as on the government level too, but
Okay.
it's just tracked a little differently.
Okay, great. And I know you kind of already touched on licensing, but how long does it take to get approval from like the federal and local governments? Like what time frame should someone expect?
We should totally follow up because I'm literally doing it right now. Because, like I mentioned, I'm doing this all so that it's basically a new business. It will be Tanglefoot Brewing LLC as opposed to Al's Barbecue Barn owns a license
Yeah,
that is Tanglefoot.
right.
So, yeah, I'll know much better in about a few weeks. So I'm going to submit the TTB and the TABC applications in the next week or so, and so I can follow up with you. But the first time I did it was an outlier.
Yeah.
Because I submitted in mid to late 2020, and there was
Hmm.
this thing going on in 2020 that was like threw everything off. It was called the pandemic, and
Yeah.
so there was nothing happening. And so I got approved. I think I got approved in 7 days on the TTB level, and
Whoa.
yeah, and the TABC level was like almost just as simple because again, it's not you're not going through the whole process of doing uh, government or like FBI background checks and
Yeah,
making sure that this person isn't laundering money. They already had the license, so you check the
sure.
box and pay the fee. So my experience is much different than what the average experience would be, and that's contingent on you getting all the information correct and sending the applications through um, correctly.
The next question we got is how long did it take to open up your brewery? So like the first dollar you spend to the first glass you're pouring, like how long did that take?
That's a good question. So the first step was obviously deciding to do it, and then I think that's when I started. It's kind of a tricky question because I developed the brand before before we did any of the licensing. So like the first step that I took, I guess not necessarily dollar I spent, was I started designing the logo. For some reason, I just had it in my brain. Like I knew what I wanted the brand to be. So I kind of mixed like Texas beer culture and Czech beer culture and like just anyway. So designing the logo, kind of fleshing out what the brand meant. And then I bought a website domain and I think maybe set up like an email address or something. Did something simple like that, and then I'd say from like the licensing standpoint, all the stuff that's like the real brewery stuff. Maybe what is it? October, November, December, January, February, March, April. it was like 6 months, 6 to 7 months.
That's fast.
Yeah. Well, again, because of all the stuff that was
You
like,
already, yeah, you're in a good position.
it wasn't complex. The thing was very simple, and so yeah, everything and things were expedited because COVID was shut down. But I had the equipment because I was homebrewing on it, right? So I was like trialing these recipes. I had well, I guess the first purchase I made was outside of first big purchase was I bought glasses. So
Mm,
if y'all check out my website or go watch one of my videos, I have these cute little dimple mugs, but they're manufactured and shipped from Germany. And so I like the first thing I did was like I'm buying these glasses. So I spent like $2,000 on glassware like
sure.
out the gate, and then was kind of like planning on doing some pop ups before I officially opened, and that never happened. But so, anyways, about that time, 6 to 8 months, I'd say.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
And how would you recommend someone market their product when they're starting out? Like, do they just talk to local breweries? Do you just do like a Facebook page? Like, how would you recommend marketing?
Um, that's an interesting question because I think I should have done a much better job. I think I could still do a much better job, but the kind of like my basics would be obviously you have to start growing social media, a social media audience, but don't get too caught up in the like you mentioned like going to talk to other breweries.
Yeah.
Like in goal, you figure out who your customer is. Like that's so important in any business. Figure out who is the avatar of the customer that will be buying your product, and then work back from there. If it's I'm opening this brewery and I just think that I'm going to be making triple dry hopped IPAs and people drink beer and that's a beer, so my customer base is everybody, right?
Hmm.
Like no, it's a very specific group of people that are looking
Hmm.
for that. Maybe it's like craft beer nerds or whatever, and then figure out ways to target that audience. So like social media is great for organic stuff, and it's also great for paid ad, if you can figure that out. But
Yeah.
having a good like just having a you're gonna eat crow or not eat crow. What is it? You're gonna suck for a while until you don't suck. So just like talking to people about the brand and telling people what you can do in like a concise way
Yeah.
is I think super helpful. Which is also I give my advice to people that are thinking about opening a brewery. If you don't have a concise vision for what you want to bring to the market, then don't do it. If your idea is I want to open a brewery so that I am the brewery here, I don't think that's enough anymore. I think that it needs to be better. I think you need to have you have to have a very specific vision for what you're looking to do.
Yeah. Okay. And touching on that point, going a little off topic, I know you said you focus on loggers,
Yep.
and I checked out your website, and you have customer testimonials on the website.
Those are
And
jokes.
oh, okay, okay. I was like, some guy said he wanted an IPA,
Yeah.
which is a funny thing, and it's actually a good question, right? Like, will you make a hazy, or will
No.
you make? Okay, so you're gonna focus on just loggers.
Yeah. So I mean, like I was to piggyback off what I was just saying. My brand is when I initially opened, it was a very specific beer drinking experience where it was great beer, but it was served in a very specific way. So I use the dimpled mugs. I have the
Yep.
Lucre side pour faucets that are from the
Yep.
Czech Republic. They're very traditional styles of beer. But the goal was to have this very, very specific beer experience where you could know a ton about beer and like really geek out and nerd out on it, or you could know nothing about beer other than it's cold and I drink it, and both of those people would be satisfied. That was kind of the goal. And now it has shifted into all of those things, but I want to be the beer of Temple, Texas. I want to be the approachable lager of Temple, Texas. And so that brand is all of those things. It happens to be Czech lagers, but basically I want to make beer that is approachable and well made, that is kind of like the go-to beer. And
Mhm.
so anything that's outside of those parameters is kind of like, yeah, who knows? Like maybe in 5 years or 2 years or 1 year, I'll be like, no, I got to make a hazy. But I've done all that, I've been a part of the what's new, like flavor of the week
Yep.
type of whatever scene, and it's just not what it's not. I'm not dissing on it. I love it,
Mhm.
but I'm going towards something else.
Awesome. Yeah, great. And this is another viewer question. So you see breweries opening and closing all the time. When you were doing your research, what did you find the main reason was breweries were closing? And obviously the answer is they didn't sell enough beer. But do you maybe like, do you think they went too big too quick? Do you think they just didn't have the cash when they were starting out? Do you think they spent too much money on equipment? Or do you just not know?
Well, I'll give you a contrarian answer to what you just said. That even if there's some breweries that they could sell 10 times more beer than they're selling and they will still close because it's a bad business. So first and foremost, understanding how business works, understanding cash flow. And this industry is a very capital intensive industry. And that means that it requires a large amount of capital in order to grow, generally speaking. So like if you have a 1 barrel system like I opened up with, and you want to produce 10 times more beer, there are different levers you can pull to increase capacity. But for this example, let's just say it's buying a 10 barrel system from the 1 barrel system. You cannot cash flow the purchase of that equipment by selling 1 barrel of beer at a time. It's just not possible. And so you either need to have other money that you saved up, have debt, or have investors in order to do that. And so a lot of people will bite off more than they can chew in that realm of debt investors or whatever, and then the revenue doesn't match up with that. So it's this tricky balance of like, you don't want to open a brewery that's got too small of a capacity that it can't keep up with demand, but you also don't want to open a 60-barrel brew house and like you're only selling in the tap room. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
there, and it's all nuanced because, and people ask me this all the time, is your brewery profitable or does this make money? And it's kind of a loaded question because the short answer is like no on paper, but it's all relative to your expenses. So like the amount of sales that I'm doing, which is very, very low compared to, let's just say, the last brewery that I worked at,
Mhm.
but my expenses are infinitely smaller than theirs, right? So
Yeah.
if I brought in $1,000 in revenue, I sold $1,000 worth of beer, and all of my expenses for the entire month were $999. That is a profitable brewery.
Mhm.
But then, then it's all scale, and can you live on $1 a month? No. So,
Right. Okay.
yeah, that's a long-winded answer to your.
No, it's great. So I mean, because I when I was looking into it myself, I had this because you mentioned it in the beginning of the call, is that there's a nightmare situation. Like, what if I don't have enough beer? Like, what if people come in and sorry, I have 3 taps that are out. I only have 1 beer. That I mean, that's a bad experience that someone walking into your brewery for the first time can see. So, but you seem like you're verging on the side of being more conservative, starting smaller, don't go so deep into it, and risk that
Yeah,
situation.
yeah, and I think opening anything without like there's risk in any small business, but
Mhm.
like opening a large brewery, a production brewery, without like proven sales or
Mhm.
proven, especially in this market is saturated. Like there are as many breweries that as we need, right? Like as far as like how much beer can be produced, there's more because there's like empty capacity. People aren't all like brewing at capacity, so there's like excess capacity in the industry. So I just think it's a huge risk to open a large production, whatever the size of it is, and just expect that like, oh, people will want it
Yeah.
because they will. And it's like, yeah, it's not true.
Okay, so we can kind of move on to equipment and location. There aren't a ton of these questions, but a viewer asked, because he's actually looking at opening up a brewery. Do you have a list of equipment that is needed to start a brewery, and like what do you need to start a production? And if you do have a list or a checklist or something, is that something you could provide?
I don't have like a checklist, but I will. Like I think I made it pretty clear. The way that I started was as shoestring
Yeah.
and low budget as you probably could, and so I was literally brewing on a half-barrel homebrew system. My big expense was a heat exchanger, which I'm a huge proponent of. I think that if you're going to splurge on anything, wort production is pretty simple. unless there's some like major flaws in your whatever homebrew setup or shitty used system setup. Like wort production is pretty simple. Make sure you have a good rolling boil. Go watch my YouTube videos to see why that's important. And then past that though, cooling your wort down and specifically having temperature control on the fermentation side. But I opened a brewery with literal upright freezers as my fermentation chambers. The checklist is making, so in short, good wort production, which is pretty simple. Like you can literally just make good wort with pots, right? Mm-hmm. Nothing crazy.
Sure.
Being able to cool down that wort is super important. So a really good, efficient heat exchanger and a cold liquor tank. So when I opened up, my cold liquor tank was a chest freezer, not the upright ones, but the big wide chest freezers that I caulked all the seams with silicone and I filled it with water and I had a temperature controller in there and I would keep it at 34 degrees. And so I used that cold water to knock out my hot wort. So, and then that in combination with a good heat exchanger, you have really good cold break and that's good for all sorts of reasons. And then good temperature control. And then obviously this goes without saying, like good solid sanitation and cleaning practices. But outside of that, I mean, there's some fundamentals on like recipe design and brewing and things like that I think are super important as far as beer is concerned. But the actual equipment does not, like you don't need a $50,000 brewing setup to brew one barrel of beer. You just don't.
Sure. Okay, great. Another viewer question about location. So I know you, I maybe fell into the location, maybe is a poor choice of words, but you didn't necessarily choose the location from a starting point to become a brewery. It was a restaurant before. But what do you think are some like really important things that are necessary for a building, like maybe ceiling height requirements or plumbing or electrical that may not be in a typical building that you might lease?
So those specifications, like, you know, kind of the big ones are like, you know, you want like a 2-inch water main inlet into the brewery for a lot of like throughput, and you want sloped floor drains, and you want, you know, 3-phase 220 electrical. All those things are pretty, you know, accessible, and you can Google that, and there's probably 1,000 brewers that have written a blog about it. But again, I am in the vein of like starting with a low barrier to entry. You're going to have sacrifices. Like, yes, this is not my first choice for where I wanted to open a brewery, but it's my only choice for opening a brewery for $10,000. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so like, it's just going to be about what you want. And so if you want to own a building that is brand new and is the perfect environment to brew beer, you're going to have a $500,000 to $1 million loan or whatever the cost is, right? Like that's just inevitable. It's going to happen. So if you're willing to compromise on that, then I think an important aspect of also figuring out what your business model is, which is a whole different conversation, because I think everybody gets into it wanting to own a brewery, and then ultimately you're owning a tap room, which is ultimately an event space. You're running a bar that's an event space. And so if that is your goal, though, then I think the location is important, obviously, and then the ambiance is the reason you have great beer experiences is because of the environment that you drink the beer in. So curate whatever the location is to the vibe that you want people to experience, and set the entire experience up around that. And just opening a tap room in a warehouse is not going to cut it anymore if that's your goal. So
right. Okay, great. I got a few versus questions. So we have like new versus used equipment. So there's like some really cool turnkey systems. I know the Blakeman Engineering has like a turnkey 3.5 barrel electric system, comes with everything, comes with a pump, all the tubing, all, you know, everything. And I think it's like $30,000. What is your thought about piecemealing used equipment? I know that's kind of what you did to save costs, is you got some used equipment for your upgrade. But looking back, would you have wished you would have got a turnkey system, or do you think those are valuable, or what's your thoughts on it?
I think they're super valuable. I think they're more valuable as you scale, though. Like if money isn't an object, always buy new, right? Like who cares? If money is not the determining factor in the decision, then absolutely buy new. But I on my scale, it made so much sense just to buy used. for everything except for, there's a few things like the heat exchanger was new. There's a few things here and there that are more like specific and specialized that I bought new. But I think as you scale is when it really starts becoming more of an issue, because you're talking about tanks having maybe they've got like, I don't know, maybe they've got some sort of pitting or some sort of deterioration of the metal or the seams or the welds. That how many more years can you get out of them? Maybe you get shipped a tank that's got a glycol jacket leak or something that's like a bigger issue than what it would have been if you bought new. But I mean, it's just the classic, like you buy new, you get brand new, but you get the new price tag. You buy used, you get all the problems, but you get it at a 50% cost savings. So yeah, it's kind of a crapshoot, but there's a lot of, honestly, maybe I'll just go ahead and redact all that and say buy used, because there's so many breweries that are closing that a lot of the equipment is borderline new anyways.
Sure. And where do you recommend someone to shop for used equipment?
There's a lot of like auctions and stuff, auction houses that are either brewery specific or kind of like in the like large manufacturing equipment space. And so you can just like a quick Google search, like used or closed brewery or auction, things like that. And you can find some of these resources. And then there are, if people are pursuing this in a serious fashion, join your state guild or your city, whatever organization or the Brewers Association. And you have access to all kinds of used equipment. Like people post on there multiple times a day about just different equipment that's for sale.
Okay, great. Another versus, so there's electric and gas systems out there. I think you're currently using a gas system. What's the main pros and cons, and what does someone have to consider when comparing the systems?
It's, from my understanding, when you get to a larger scale, heat efficiency is a big part of it. So like just the amount of money that you would spend on the BTUs that are transferred into the wort during the heating process. Steam is just more efficient, and I think the rule of thumb is like anything above a 15 barrel system, it should be steam from an efficiency standpoint. My personal experience has only been with gas fired, direct fired systems. I kind of like it. I like the fact that you can get Maillard reactions from really high BTU flame, but for a consistency in brewing, it's not really ideal. So at a certain scale, let's just call it 15 barrels and up, steam is definitely preferential, but steam comes with a whole host of issues. Steam boiler generators that are kind of their own thing and require a specialized set of knowledge if you want to maintain and keep those running efficiently. So
sure. Okay. And the last question, appreciate your time thus far. But food, I know you currently do not serve food. I know you're looking at planning to serve food.
I'm not.
Oh, you're not. Okay. So I guess maybe that answers my question, but my question is, how important is food? Because like, do you see like a lot of people walk in the front door, do you serve food? No. And then they walk right out, or do you have calls? You have to turn people down, turn away business. How often are people wanting to eat?
Food is very important. And my first career, and I've been, up until I left Black Star, I've been in the food industry my entire career, my working life, right? So I have done it all, and I want nothing to do with food anymore. I've done it. I've done it, and it's not, for me, this is not what I want to pursue. Even if it means I lose 50% revenue that I could have, I just am not interested in it. Having said all that, decide what your business model is. Again, thinking that you're opening a brewery and your brewery is a 1 barrel or 3 barrel system in a tap room, and you're going to be out there hanging with the guests. It's not a brewery, it's a tap room, it's an event space. And so you need to host things that bring people in to drink your beer. One of the things is food. Highly, highly recommend something simple, something efficient, something that doesn't have a lot of waste. What I've seen be the most successful in brew pubs and tap rooms is pizza. 100%. Like, there's not even another example that I can think of. The most popular brewery in town, in Austin specifically, is Pine House Pizza. They have 4 locations, and they're founded on pizza.
Okay.
And so, like, if you're like kind of trying to feel the waters out for like, I want something, but I don't want to like have a whole menu, pizza. But food trucks are also an option in the industry. If you have more of a warehouse space, tap room vibe, you can outsource that to somebody else. But food is a nightmare. For anybody who's worked in the food industry, it has a ton of benefits and pros that are like heartwarming, like serving food. Same thing with beer. Like you create something and then people ingest it and it brings them joy and happiness. But it's low margin from a business perspective. It's crazy turnover. It's very hard work too. So like the people that are cooking your food get their asses kicked on a daily basis. It's like all of the things, all this baggage I have in my head. But it's a necessary evil if your goal is to run a event space tap room. But it's just something that I'm not pursuing.
I know there's a brewery, I wouldn't say local, it's in Detroit, and I'm like an hour north of Detroit. But they serve it's just food prep. So it's like a Subway. So they do sandwiches. So they only have like 10 sandwiches on the menu. And some are cold, some are hot, but it's just sandwiches. So they just have to have lunch meat, some bacon, tomato, lettuce, some different types of bread. And that's kind of the direction I was looking at going, is stay out of the cooking, stay more in the food prep area, because then you don't have to have, I feel like just the requirements of entry is a lot lower. You don't need to hire a chef. You can just hire a few guys who can make some sandwiches. But it's definitely a route that I was looking at going when I was looking into it.
Yeah. And that's great. Like keeping it simple is always better. But, again, the food industry is just, I have a giant scar in my brain, from doing it for so long, but it sucks when it's really, really slow. And it also sucks when it's really, really busy. So it's kind of like this like worst of both worlds. And so like, let's say the sandwich example, I'm not trying to dissuade anybody. I'm just, this is my experience. That like the sandwich example, there is never a harmony in food. It's either too slow, we need to get more sales, food's going bad, we're throwing it away, people are just standing around, you got time to lean, you got time to clean, or it's crazy busy, everybody's extremely stressed out, we're running out of food, we can't keep up, high anxiety. And I've never experienced a harmonious balance between kind of sales and expectations. And that's like, it's a bummer too, because like think about it, like we all like, and maybe I've just not been a part of like any stellar teams, or I've not been stellar myself, but yeah, it's a weird dynamic for sure.
Sure. Okay, well, hey, I appreciate your time. This was super insightful. You definitely know a lot, and it's definitely given me stuff to think about. And I hope the viewers out there listening and watching definitely have some stuff to think about as well. I'll leave it to you. Do you have any closing words? Anything you want to share with people that might want to start opening a brewery that wasn't already covered, or do you think we covered it?
I mean, there's always a ton of stuff. I think that again, I think I'll die on this hill of if go into anything, not even brewery specific, but just business in general, like understanding that you're pursuing owning a business, and then have a very, very specific idea of a concept that you want to, a goal basically you want to achieve. Because just going into this like vague, I just want to be able to make beer, I think is a losing battle. So have a very specific goal and then achieve that goal. Maybe it's very, very small returns. Maybe it's you're only brewing like I was initially 1 barrel of lager at a time, but it like you have something to work towards versus this. This week is a nut brown. Next week we're doing a double IPA. This week we're doing a saison, and just be a little bit more focused. If the goal is to pursue beer, which again I will say that if your goal is to have a tap room that is bustling, and you're doing trivia, and everybody has something to drink on the menu, that's not a brewery. That is an event space, in my opinion. So
sure,
just consider all those things and then pursue it.
Great. Perfect. Well, if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to Tanglefoot Brewing on YouTube. He puts out content. It's pretty interesting stuff, especially if you're looking at starting a brewery one day. And if you haven't already, make sure to like the video and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more content like this. Anyway, guys, we're going to go ahead and wrap this one up, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.